name is EconomyofOurOwnEisler. I am president of the Center for Partnership Studies, and I'm author of quite a few books, including probably my best known one is The Chalice and the Blade, but also The Real Wealth of Nations. And that book is about an economy of our own, which I wholeheartedly support simply because we have not had an economy of our own. Our economic system has basically ignored and devalued anything connected with women, with the so-called feminine, whether it's in women or men, or in social and economic policy. And that is one of the themes of the Real Wealth of Nations, as well as of my latest book, which just came out with Oxford University Press, Nurturing Our Humanity. My work, some of you are familiar with some of my books, with The Chalice and the Blade, with the Real Wealth of Nations. It really has focused so much on the inclusion in our policies, in our thinking, in our worldview of us, women, the female half of the female form of humanity. And as I point out in the Real Wealth of Nations, our economic system has completely ignored us and devalued anything connected with women or the feminine. We have, in both capitalist and socialist theory, and that's why we have to go beyond this to an economy of our own, what I call an economy of partnerism. We really have to understand that we have had economic systems guided by a hidden system of gendered values, in which there's always somehow enough money, enough resources for anything stereotypically associated with those who are supposed to dominate, men, quote, real men. Prisons, like the stereotype of the punitive male head of household, weapons and wars, like the hero as killer, but somehow there hasn't been enough money for what economics should be about: caring for people and caring for nature, child care, child nutrition, everything that makes life better, caring for nature. I think that it's a truism that we value what we count and we count what we value. And strangely enough, but not so strangely when you consider the hidden system of gendered values, that the values anything considered feminine or soft, our economic indicators give no value whatsoever to the three life-sustaining sectors: the natural economy, the volunteer community economy, and yes, the household economy. So that economists are taught to think of people who care for others, be it for children or for the elder or for a sick person working from dusk, from dawn to dusk, as economically unproductive. Why? Because our system doesn't reward this work. So to make a long story short, we have to change how we measure economic health. And while there are a lot of so-called GDP alternatives floating around, the ones that we developed at the Center for Partnership Studies, and please go to centerforpartnership.org, and that we're working to develop into a social wealth index, they do take into account the majority of humanity, women and children, in economic terms. The financial value of the so-called women's work of caring and caregiving. People starting in early childhood, or for nature, like keeping a clean and healthy home environment, which has been so devalued. And along with that, we get the devaluation, of course, of caring for our natural life support systems, right? The social wealth indicators also differ from other indicators, and I really want to invite you to join in the campaign for the Social Wealth Index, which we are now developing, in that they not only give us a snapshot of quality of life as it is, but they also have a very, very important and ignored component in so-called GDP alternatives. Other than this, the kinds of investments that will make for better outcomes. So they look at both inputs and outputs. And I'm very excited about the project that we now have funding for to develop a social wealth index. Because why? We now have 24 social wealth economic indicators. People are not going to really be guided in their policy decisions by having to look at 24 indicators. So we are working to condense them, and it's going to take a while. But in the meantime, our job is to get the word out that that is what we need, the social wealth index. What's good for women is good for the world. And vice versa, what's bad for women is bad for the world. So while this is certainly a vital women's issue, obviously showing the value of the work that under both capitalist and socialist theory, which came out of more rigid domination times, both Smith and Marx relegated as to reproductive work, which was supposed to be done for free by women in a male-controlled household. So it was invisible, wasn't it? So yes, we have a chance now to not only change our economic thinking and our economic metrics for the sake of women and children who are horribly, children of both genders, who are terribly impacted by this devaluation of care and caregiving, but for all of us, men included. So I would say that yes, it's a women's issue, but it is also a vital social and economic issue, developing the social wealth index. And again, I invite you all to join with us in changing thinking, because this is not only a tool to guide policymakers, it's an educational tool to change everyone's thinking about what is and is not economically valuable, especially now as we enter the post-industrial knowledge service era. This is a crisis, but it's also an opportunity. Why? Because neuroscience shows that whether or not this, quote, high quality human capital that economists keep telling us is the most important capital for our post-industrial era, whether or not it is developed largely hinges on exactly that, quality of care and education, especially in early childhood. Cognitive dissonance is a very important weapon. And I'm using dominator language. Cognitive dissonance is a very important tool for change. We're trying to, as women, enter into an economic system in which we had absolutely no part in building, in which the needs of women, children, and men, the real human needs, were simply ignored. Now is the time, as I always put it, to not just try to get a bigger slice of the existing economic pie, but to bake a new and better economic pie. And that's what this work is about. We've got to get this out, especially to young people. And they're so hungry. I mean, they know that they were born into a world that was misbuilt, but they don't know what needs to be done. And really, they need to understand that just talking about equity and justice isn't going to change things unless we look at the foundations, which are childhood, gender, economics, but a different economics, because both socialism and capitalism came out of early industrial times and more domination-oriented times, and stories and language. Language channels our thinking. So start thinking in terms of partnership and domination rather than left, right. I mean, there have been horrible domination regimes on both sides, for goodness sakes. I was a child refugee from the Holocaust. I mean, fortunately, we were able to escape, and I grew up because the Nazis, robbed my parents of everything in the industrial slums of Havana. So very early, I had to ask really a very basic question that I'm sure many of you have asked, which is, does it have to be this way? Does there have to be so much cruelty, violence, injustice? And if not, what is the alternative? And it's very important that I was able, through my research, to find an answer. And the answer is a resounding yes. However, we cannot see this through the conventional lenses of capitalism, socialism, right-left, secular, religious, Eastern, Western, and so on. Why? Because they have all been infected by this domination virus of the gendered system of values in which anything associated with the majority of humanity, women and children, is so devalued that it's practically invisible. So this has enormous significance for me as a woman who suddenly, after all these years of so-called higher education, discovered something really, to me, shocking, which is that in all these years, in all of this education, there had hardly been anything by, about, or for people like me, women. And this is not coincidental. This is part of the system of domination, and it's part of the reason that we must, as women and as enlightened men, change this gendered system of values and thereby change not only economics, but family, education, religion, politics, economics. And we can do it. We have the data, we have the information. So let's do it.